The day the widow's basket received 0 bids was the day Mara Holloway finally understood how quickly a town could decide your worth and quietly agree that you had none. Even though the market buzzed with voices and laughter and the smell of baked bread and fresh leather swirled through the dusty square, she stood alone beside her small woven basket, fingers wrapped tightly around its edge as if holding on could stop her. Life from sliding further downhill, the hand-stitched lining inside the basket, barely visible beneath the few jars of preserved beans, a simple hand-loomed shawl, and 2 carefully braided lengths of dried herbs that had taken weeks to prepare, each item made with patience and hope. Yet people passed her stall as if it were air, their eyes flickering toward her and then away just as fast, whispers floating behind her like gnats. Unlucky. Poor thing. Twice widowed in 5 years. Nothing good ever sticks to her, and Mara felt every word land heavier than a hammer because this auction wasn't just about money but survival, about paying the overdue taxes on the small plot she stubbornly refused to abandon, about buying flour before winter, about proving to herself more than anyone that she still belonged in a world eager to erase her. And as the auctioneer's chant rose and fell for neighboring baskets filled with bright fabrics and cured meats, she stood straight anyway, chin lifted, recalling the promise she had made at her husband's grave 3 springs ago that she would endure even if endurance felt like punishment, because Raoul Holloway had believed in grit more than luck. And though the town chose to remember him as the man who died in a river accident while hauling timber, she remembered the way he laughed loudly and loved fiercely, the way he said some people were born marked by hardship not because they were weak but because they were strong enough to carry it. Yet strength didn't soften hunger, and as the auctioneer finally arrived at her stall and cleared his throat, announcing her basket with mechanical politeness, the silence that followed was louder than insult, seconds stretching painfully as hands remained lowered, faces turned away, children tugging their parents toward better tables, and when the auctioneer muttered no bids and moved on, something in Mara cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way ice fractures beneath deep water, and she blinked fast, refusing to cry here, refusing to give them the satisfaction, unaware that not everyone had turned away, because at the edge of the square stood a man few townsfolk noticed until they absolutely had to, a broad-shouldered Apache rancher named Taza Red Elk, whose presence carried the stillness of mountains and whose eyes missed very little, and while most saw a cursed widow with a modest basket, Taza saw something else entirely, her posture that did not fold under humiliation, the calluses on her hands that spoke of work not pity, the way she didn't rush to pack up when dismissed but stayed rooted as if dignity itself were a boundary she refused to cross backward, and being Apache in a town that tolerated his business but never truly welcomed his roots, Taza understood invisible walls better than most, understood how quickly people assigned value based on stories they told themselves, and as the auction continued and bidding grew louder for shinier things, he felt a quiet pressure settle in his chest, not anger but recognition, the kind that comes when you see someone standing where you once stood, and when the auctioneer circled back for final clearances and muttered an afterthought about unsold goods, Taza stepped forward without raising his voice, the subtle authority in his movement, drawing unexpected attention, as a few heads turned, and when he asked to revisit the widow's basket, surprise rippled through the onlookers, some scoffing under their breath, others watching with thinly veiled curiosity as Mara looked up for the first time since the failed bid, her eyes meeting his, startled, guarded. Proud, and Taza didn't smile or explain himself. He simply nodded once at the auctioneer and said a number that made the man blink. Triple the market's starting value, triple what similar baskets had fetched all morning, triple enough that whispers flared like sparks and Mara's breath caught painfully in her throat, certain she had misheard. But when the auctioneer repeated the bid louder and asked for confirmation, Taza nodded again, steady as a tree rooted through stone, and no one countered because no one intended to. Disdain flickering across a few faces. Why waste money on bad luck? But Taza completed the transaction without flinching, producing payment earned from years of disciplined ranching on land he fought to keep and improve, and as the auctioneer finalized the sale, the crowd quickly moved on, their interest already fading. But Mara stood frozen until Taza approached her stall directly, and gently lifted the basket, as if it were fragile, not worthless, holding it out to her with a respectful distance instead of ownership, telling her simply that the work was good, that it deserved more than silence. That value didn't vanish just because people decided to look away, and something about his tone, quiet, unperformative, sincere, undid her defenses more than kindness ever had. Her fingers trembling as she accepted payment that felt unreal, gratitude tangling with pride and confusion, because she hadn't asked to be rescued and yet somehow had been seen. And as Taza turned to leave without demanding conversation or favor, Mara called after him despite herself, asking why, needing to understand why today of all days mattered enough for him to act. And he paused just long enough to glance back and say that luck was a word people used when they didn't want to admit they were afraid of resilience, that he paid triple because he knew what it cost to keep standing when the world expected you to kneel. And with that he walked away toward the open road leading beyond town limits, leaving behind a widow clutching long withheld hope in a basket that no longer symbolized failure but the beginning of a story the town would soon be forced to reconsider. And as Mara watched him disappear into the heat-dusted distance, she didn't yet know that this single moment would reshape her life, challenge her fears, and bring into her path a man who saw her, worth long before anyone else dared to. And if you're still listening right now, feeling that quiet pull of a story about second chances and unexpected courage, remember this is just chapter 1, and subscribing means you won't miss how one bid rewrites 2 lives forever.